Years ago, I was sitting in a club listening to one of my old mentors play, Ron Anthony. Now, Ron played guitar for Frank Sinatra, and every time he had a gig, all these guitar players in town would show up because they knew how good he was. Now, I was one of the younger musicians there. In fact, I'd just gotten my driver's license, and I listened to him play for the night. Then after the gig, everyone would sort of gather around, hang out backstage, and then behind that there was like an alley out to the street. And I remember talking with this one guitar player, and he said, "Well, have you started learning your triads yet?" And I was like, "What? What do you mean?" And we were actually out back behind the club, and his car was there, and he just pulled out of his trunk a nylon string guitar, and he started showing me these chord voicings. He started going up and down the fretboard, with all these different shapes, and he's like, "Yeah, well, all of that is an A chord." I was like, "What? Like, that's a system? How does that work?" And so this was what started me down the road of unlocking the fretboard and using triads to do that. And this is something that can really help your rhythm and lead. So I want to share with you some tips on that in this video, starting with what is a triad? Well, a triad comes from the Greek root word tri, which means three. So a triad is a 3-note chord. So anytime you have, a chord like C, D, F, G, these are all triads. So there's sort of two ways you can think about triads. Is that root way, which is just, okay, we've got a 3-note chord. And when you look at a chord like, let's say F here, I've got the notes F, A, C, and then I've got F again. So it's really just 3 letter names, F, A, C, but then some of them are doubled. Like I've got an F here and an F here. Or if I play this G chord, I've got a G here, a G here, and a G on the top string, but it's still just G, B, D are the notes. And then you just have repetitions of those. So like again, G, D, G, but it's still a triad. Now once you start adding beyond the basic triad, like if you take a G chord and you add another note to it like F, now I've got a G7, or you start getting into chords like F11 or E flat 13. These are no longer considered simple triads. They're not like C or D anymore because we're involving more notes beyond that basic 3-note structure. And that 3-note structure is usually just the root, the 3rd, and the 5th of the scale. So if I had a C chord, it would be C, E, and G, root, 3rd, 5th. Now, another way of thinking about this is just grouping 3 strings. Like a lot of times you'll have guitar parts that are like, here I'm just playing the top 3 strings. And it could be any, it could be like the middle 3, it could be, spreading it out. Like that's one of my favorite C chords right there. And that's just, 3 notes. But you'll notice it sounds almost bigger than this chord here. C, you can play C like this. That's 5 strings, or here's 3. It almost sounds bigger, I think, just because your ear fills in the extra information. So those are essentially the 2 ways that I think about triads. You've got the root of the word, which is like, okay, a 3-note chord, which could be a chord like C, D, F, G, whatever. Then you have sort of the guitar lens of looking at a triad, which is like, okay, I might play something on 3 strings, and maybe I have a guitar part that's like, right? The Police, Andy Summers would do that a lot, use chords on the top strings. Sometimes 3, sometimes 4, but if you're using 3 there, then that's gonna be a triad. All right, next I want to talk about triad inversions, but before we jump into that, if you're new to the channel and haven't grabbed my fretboard guide yet, this is going to tie right in with this lesson. It's going to show you 5 chords and 5 scales that I use to map out the entire fretboard. And you'll see triads right in these shapes. You can get it completely for free. Just go to johnmclennan.com/fretboard guide and grab that now as my gift to you. So there are 3 variations that you can have to a triad. So if I take a C chord like this, which again we learned has the notes C, E, and G. If I make C the lowest note in my chord, then that's called a root position triad. Okay, so C is the lowest note, and then that's followed by E and G. But they could be in any order. Like I could go C, G, E like this. That's still root position. What determines this is the lowest note, or the bass note. The next inversion we have from there is what we call first inversion. And this is where you put the third as the lowest note. So C, E, G, root, third, fifth. We're gonna put the E now as the lowest note. And what you can do is you can just think of that typical C chord and then play from the fourth string down there. And if you want to just do 3 notes, you could strum more if you want. But that's gonna be a first inversion. And notice that each chord inversion sounds a little different. For example, if I put the C in the bass, it sounds very stable and just sort of grounded. When I put the E in the bass, it has a slightly different sound. To me, it's less stable than a root position chord. So from there, we have second inversion. And this is where we put not the root, not the third, but the fifth of the chord in the bass, which is gonna be G. Here I'm gonna play just the top 3 strings of a C chord. And now I've got a second inversion triad. So root, first inversion, second inversion, and then if you invert again, you actually get root again, because there's only 3 notes. There's only 3 possibilities there for a bass note. Now, a great way to learn triads on guitar is to learn what I call chord scales, and this combines chords and scales together. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say that I took a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and I put a chord with each note. So that would be like this. So I've got C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished, C. Now, as I said, triads are awesome in songs. Some ways you might use them would be like, you see this a lot in funk guitar parts, like. Play that funky music, white boy. The chord there is like a 9th chord. I'm just playing the top 3 strings to get a triad there. Roxanne, right? You might also take a triad and break up the notes of it, like. Right, Allman Brothers. So here's the triad. So that's a quick look at how guitar triads work on guitar, and remember that these can be used for rhythm and lead. If you want to continue with this lesson and learn more about the fretboard and the way I see things, then go to johnmclennan.com/fretboard guide and grab my free fretboard guide PDF. This is going to show you 5 chords and 5 scales that map out the fretboard. And again, this works for rhythm and lead and any style, because in any style you play, you're going to have chords, you're going to have melodies, so it all connects together. Just go to johnmclennan.com/fretboard guide and grab that now as my gift to you. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you might like this one next.